Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Stutzman. I'm from Ventus. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, and we're very excited to have you here today to meet our panel and have our discussion on how COVID-19 has impacted financial institutions and their interactions with customers and the satisfaction that they're seeing. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what Ventus does, and then we'll get into the discussion. So Ventus is the leading national provider of ATM network connectivity. We provide a fully managed solution that runs on our Ventus private network that has dual data centers with dual redundancy and has multi-point routing out to multi-point connections out to our ATM gateway processors, DVRs, check imaging, any type of connection that you need. We provide that as part of that full solution. It's a full managed solution. We work with both ATMs, ITMs, remote and branch machines. So anytime you're looking for any information on how to get your ATMs up and connected and provide that best uptime for your customers and enhance your customer experience, reach out to us here at Ventus. So with that, I'd like to introduce EJ, and he will bring you the panel and lead you on the discussion today. So thanks again for coming. We appreciate your time.
And thank you very much, Bill. We certainly appreciate your support and that of Ventus. So thank you so much for being with us. And it's an absolute honor to be here to help really just facilitate this conversation. And you're here to hear some fantastic experts in this space. And hopefully I'll just do my best job possible to facilitate a great conversation amongst the four. By way of quick introduction, my name is EJ Kritz. I'm the Director of Training and Insights for 8th Power Consulting. We are a 23-year-old customer experience firm that specializes in research and training for the financial services industry. We've got some of our great friends and even clients here to join us today. And of course, we're here to talk about post-COVID-19. What is gonna happen? And what are people thinking about, and what is some of the thought process, particularly around the omni-channel experience, thinking about ATM versus ITM, the digital applications. Hopefully we'll be able to uncover a significant amount of that for you today. And speaking of you, what an incredible audience. Well in excess of 250 of you from literally all over the globe. I counted at least 30 different countries represented on today's webinar. And so we're so grateful that you're here. One little bit of housekeeping. Of course, we're all, for the most part, home. So you never know what might happen. The internet might go out, a dog might bark, a kid might run in. We're all used to it at this point, but certainly don't want to forget to mention that. So before we begin, because we'd actually like to share with you a little bit of data from 8th Power's COVID-19 impact study, a study that we'll be emailing all of you free of charge at the completion of this webinar. We'd like to hear a little bit from you. And so we'd like to introduce 2 poll questions. So John, if we can have our first 2 poll questions ready. And we'd like to get just a little bit of information from you. So here's the first one. It's a simple one. Has your branch ever closed during the pandemic? Yes or no? Give us a quick response. Has your bank branch ever closed during the COVID-19 pandemic? We'll give you about 30 or 45 seconds here. This one's an easy one. A quick yes, no. And I think we've got a little bit of sense of what's happened out there in the industry as far as bank branches closing or not. Be great to get your feedback though. So has your branch ever closed during the pandemic? This is the first thing we're a little curious about. I'll give you about 10 more seconds. All right, great. So let's close out our first poll question, and we're going to bring the second one right behind it. Quite simply, is your branch open now? Yes or no? So we saw lots of banks closing throughout the world. Many of them are open, many of them are not. In fact, I know at least a couple of institutions that initially were open and even rolled it back a little bit. So even if you said your bank did not close in poll question number 1, maybe it is now closed in poll question number 2. So we'll give you about 15 more seconds here to answer our second poll question. All right, thank you all very much. We're going to have one more poll question coming up for you in just a couple moments. But first, let's share a little bit of insight from our COVID-19 study. You know, one of the very first things that we really wanted to understand was just general satisfaction. Did it fluctuate in any kind of great way? Were there wide spreads that we found interesting, particularly during the pandemic? It is not uncommon for us to see a spread between credit unions and some of the bigger banks. This survey was conducted in May and surveyed over 2,000 US banking customers about their feelings. Now, while it looks like a significant spread between some of the nation's bigger banks and smaller banks and credit unions, there's a cautionary tale here. And that is that we've been in an environment for many, many years now where the big banks, got news for you, y'all, they're catching up to the little guys and they're doing some really incredible things to elevate the customer experience. And as we'll talk, we found that big banks in many ways were in a very strong position to deliver to customers the experience that they wanted in a pandemic. It's not to say the small banks didn't do well, because we saw some great cases where we had some ultra super prepared community banks and credit unions, but to understand what would make them prepared, to understand what would drive home an absolutely incredible customer experience, for that, we need to dive into the weeds just a little bit more. What you have here is a little bit of a heat map. We asked our panel of respondents a little bit around what the biggest priorities were for them as it related to safely banking with their primary financial institution. And so in the bubble, you got kind of a sweet spot. We're talking about masks. We're talking about hand sanitizer. We're talking about keeping distance from folks in the branch. All things that we commonly think, well, that all makes sense. But if you notice in the upper left quadrant is the specific safety measure that customers saw their banks doing almost universally, which was going to drive up only and restricting the ability to come into the branch. And yet it was the single lowest priority in our survey amongst customers. So only about 30% of our panelists said drive up only and restricting the lobby is my high, or I consider it very important, top drawer of importance relative to keeping safe. But I find it interesting that just outside the little shaded bubble, it says increase abilities to conduct transactions outside of the branch. In other words, give me some cool stuff. Give me some mobile options. Give me some online options. Let me do more things at an ATM that maybe I ever could do before. And so we see it as something that banks had a very low frequency of delivering to customers, which means one of two things for me. Either the banks just weren't adding additional features to the delight of the customer, or they were, and they just weren't doing a great job telling the customers about all the awesome new tools that they had. So that's a big part of what we're going to talk about here today. But we have a poll question that we want to ask you, and we're going to actually show you the results to this one, because we need to forecast a little bit, right? We need to project. We need to see what's going to happen. That's why we're all here today, right? So let's, John, bring up the third poll question here today. And it is, what do you think will happen to customer interactions after things return to normal? Do you think things will just completely go back to how it always was? We'll go back to normal interactions and shaking hands and all that good stuff? Do we think that we'll stay at the current levels that we are, with interactions behind glass and not shaking hands and keeping 6 feet social distance even during the time of a sales call or a account opening experience? Or number 3, level off somewhere in between the pre-pandemic experience and what we're seeing for the most part in bank branches today. Let's give you a few minutes here. So option number 1, we're going to go back to normal. Option number 2, what you see is what you get. This is how it's always going to be from now on. And option number 3, kind of somewhere in the middle, I think. Give you 10 more seconds to respond to this one. Oh, there we go. All right, here's our results. So 80% of you think somewhere kind of right in the middle. Very few of you, only a small handful, think that we're going to go back to pre-pandemic levels. So thank you so much for that feedback and for that information. All right, John, we can clear that away, and let's see a little bit actually from our survey. What would our survey suggest as far as volumes and where transactions may or may not go? We are forecasting a 19% net loss to branch traffic. And of course, huge gains in the online space, in the mobile space, nice gains in the ATM space as well. So I don't think that this surprises anybody. I think that these numbers are pretty in line with some other numbers that are floating around the industry. So I think the question has been, we know there's going to be a shift, but by how much, and is it permanent? So this question was literally, after the pandemic is all done, are you coming back? Are you coming back to the branch? Or are you going to be relying more on mobile, digital ATM solutions? So speaking of ATM, actually, this is an area where we want to kick off our panel discussion. There's a lot of chatter in the industry for years about interactive teller machines. In fact, we knew writing the survey there were probably enough customers who had never heard of an ITM that we better explain what it is in the survey. But we did ask, if your bank or credit union were to offer an interactive teller machine, how likely would you be to use that device versus walking into the lobby and having a traditional in-branch teller experience? And we found that 46% of customers would actually be more likely to use an ITM. Not just as likely, that number was closer to 73%. But 46% of customers would be more likely to use an interactive teller machine than to see a live teller in branch. So quite a bit of data for you guys to chew on. We look forward to getting you the full white paper by email very shortly. But we've got an incredible panel to discuss these topics. You didn't come here to listen to me. You came here to listen to these guys. So I'd love to go through our panel here. We're going to start off with Stacy from the incredible, amazing TD Bank, one of our longest standing partners. We love Stacy. And so Stacy, if you would do us the honor of kicking off our panel introductions, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much, EJ. And it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I have 25 plus years experience in customer experience space. The last 16 years have been with TD Bank, heading up not just our customer experience strategy, but also our employee engagement strategy, which is so important because those of you know that what our employees do and how they interact with our customers absolutely makes a difference. So absolute pleasure to be here with you today on behalf of our human element.
Thank you,
and Corey,
Stacey.
I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Stacey. I'm Corey LeBlanc, I'm the Chief Digital and Innovation Officer for Origin Bank. For you guys who are not aware of Origin, we are a $6+ billion regional community bank headquartered in North Central Louisiana in the town of Bruston. We have 40+ branch locations in 3 states, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. And a little bit about my role is I'm the professional IT nerd, right, amongst our IT departments and the various other organizational departments in Origin Bank. And I've been a professional nerd for over 20 years. And my role is to basically work with the various organizational departments to help find efficient ways to use technology to basically build extraordinary customer experiences and create efficiency inside of the organization to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the customer.
Thank you, Corey. Let's send it over to Sven.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me here today. So I am the VP of Managed Services for Kartronics. My day-to-day role essentially is around creating an outsourcing solution for different financial institutions out there, large and small. And so I work with a lot of financial institutions from day to day and really trying to address some of the challenges that they're facing today during the pandemic and after the pandemic around the distribution channel and starting to rethink that channel as a whole. So that is what I do with Kartronics, and we have a lot of solutions to address some of these challenges. And I'm glad to be here and discuss some of those things today.
Thank you so much. Last but not least, let's go north of the border to Canada and say hi to Leslie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, Jay. Thanks for the invitation. And I want to say, too, that it's just really a pleasure to share that space with all of you guys in here. Yes, I am in Toronto, and I'm here representing CIBC. I'm part of the CIBC Digital Group. And I have experience like about 22 years in working with user experience groups, trying to deliver the best possible user experience in different industries like financial and government as well. And with CIBC, I've been like 14 years part of this group. I am currently the senior manager of the digital experience team, and my team is basically formed by a group of designers, user experience designers, visual designers, content writers, and translators. We are basically in charge of the digital experience of our digital channels, online banking and mobile banking. So everything that you see out there available for customers is basically designed by my team. And one thing that I want to say is that I love how the conversation has shifted really to make sure that the user experience is the priority among all of us and the roles that we perform, whether it's user experience or technology or people working at the branch. I really love that conversation because I think it brings us together to make sure that we're always looking at user experience from all different angles.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Leslie. I really sincerely appreciate it. And let's dive right into some of the conversation that we want to have here. I mentioned at 8th Power, we're a research firm. We love listening to the customer and hearing what the customer has to say and having that drive direction. So, Stacy, let me start the conversation with you. I know, TD, you always have the eye on the ball as it relates to the voice of your customer. You're always listening. And we finished sort of my portion of the presentation sharing some of the data around what customers might be looking for and transaction. We'll start with Stacy, Corey, and then Leslie, and then Sven, I'll have a follow-up conversation with you. But as far as your given institutions and your voice of customer, what are you starting to hear around what your customers are looking for post-pandemic?
Yeah, and it's a great question for sure, EJ. And here's what I would say is that listening is so important. And we're listening on a whole different level now, right? And I will say here at TD, we do thousands and thousands of surveys every single day following customer interactions with us. And so what we're starting to hear is just a shift in the sentiment, right? Early on, I think everyone was in it together. And now I think we're in this space where our customers have their unique needs and they're coming to our table. And as we're listening, it has to be in a very fine tune to both our customers as well as to our employees too, right? They know the next best thing. And so when we think about that transition from in-person, we have to remember that it may not be in person right now. We may still have to use technology to still be face-to-face in some way, shape, or form, but there is a real need for that digital space. But the key is making sure that our employees have the knowledge and the proficiency to be able to share that in a very natural way with our customers. So we are seeing that sentiment shift. That 19% was no surprise when I saw that data, and our customers probably will, like your poll, will likely have some kind of hybrid model as we move forward. So I don't have the answers in the magic, do these 5 things, but what we do have is number 1, listen to your customers, number 2, listen to your employees so that you can carve out exactly what that experience needs to look like in the go forward.
Thanks, Stacy.
No,
Corey,
I
how
couldn't.
about you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Stacy. And so we're seeing the same things. As you said, listen to your customer. And so the way that we're listening to our customers right now is through their transactions. How are they interacting with our institutions today? They're not walking into our locations like they were before. For the vast majority of people, branches are still closed. For us, it's appointments. Scheduling is allowed, and they can come into the locations and have interactions with our bankers if they need to. But the vast majority of our customers have turned to the digital channels. And so we're seeing a very similar thing to your statistics. We're seeing a significant increase in mobile adoption. So customers who were not logging into mobile before they are today, and they're doing so more frequently than they were even before the pandemic started for the mobile users who were already on there. Now, what we're also seeing is that online banking is having an increase, but not to the extent that mobile is. And so obviously everybody has that phone in their pocket, they're carrying it around, and so that's the easiest way for them to interact with their finances. One of the things that was really surprising for us, and it actually makes sense now that we kind of start to look at things, is we started to see a drop off in ATM transactions. So customers weren't coming to get cash, and so they were doing things through products like Zelle or regular internal transfers, and so they weren't really handling cash as much. And so they weren't really needing that. So what we're trying to learn from there is, what is that next iterative step? How can we continue to make sure that the products and services that we offer, the ones that we're going to start to invest in or we're going to grow with, are the ones that our customers actually need and they're wanting right now? So we're excited to continue to watch as this thing progresses to kind of really start to determine what that next step for Origin and what that next thing we can do to make sure that our customers' needs are met.
And Leslie, is it anything different north of the border as far as seeing transaction shifts, or pretty much in line?
I think it's pretty much in line. The one thing that I noticed, and it's just really a combination of things, voice of the customer has always been there, right? What is different this time, and this is my perception, it is that, in the past, technology typically drives change. And then we go and ask customers, how do you feel about this feature? Do you like it in mobile? Is it better for you if it's available at the branch? So we do that type of research. Right now, the voice of the customer is clear and loud, just because it just happened organically with all this, the COVID-19 and the pandemic. So I think the best that banks can do at the moment is just listen to that feedback and attend those needs. Specifically in my group, digital, we know that having a really robust suite of services that can allow customers to complete more of the transactions that in some cases some customers would normally do at the branch, now they're shifting and adopting and adapting to use mobile and online moving forward. I don't think that is going to change dramatically. Once they get used to those the convenience of those services, that probably is going to stay there. But then at the same time, that forces banks to actually increase and provide richer services, right? More robust ways to provide that ongoing support, things like chatbot, or even to start with process like onboarding, or faster, seamless ways of opening an account online. So those are the type of things that I think are pretty strong in this environment in Canada.
I found what Corey said really interesting, the idea about ATM transactions maybe shifting downward. Sven, when we spoke earlier this week, you had some interesting thoughts on actually the possibility of long-term seeing those numbers increase. What are your thoughts there on that shift?
Sure. So a couple of things are happening. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is, due to the pandemic, different areas are seeing different impacts on the transactions. So there's some areas with higher restrictions, so the transactions are impacted there differently versus states and cities and locales where the restrictions aren't necessarily there or not as great. So that's one, but what we're seeing from an industry perspective based on the customers that we're working with in different financial institutions is that transactions are definitely shifting from physical to digital. So we know that for a fact. What we're also seeing is that the types of transactions are shifting. So keep in mind, for example, just going based on Corey's example he had earlier, from an ATM perspective, so the customers generally either withdraw cash or deposit money or checks into an ATM. So the types of transactions are shifting to the digital. It's really having an impact on the way we think about this channel overall, right? So the withdrawals may have decreased in some areas a little bit due to the pandemic, and people just aren't shopping and doing the normal things that they were doing previously. But what we're seeing is that there is an absolute shift into the other transactions that they're doing at the ATM. So in a lot of scenarios, we're seeing actually the deposits increase because there is now that focus in moving those transactions from the teller to the digital side of things. And in most cases, as everybody stated here, the branches are no longer there. So the teller they're used to doing these transactions, whether it's deposit cash or check, really now has shifted from the teller to the ATM. And so we're seeing that overall. It's still too early to tell exactly how much that impact is because of the different restrictions and geographically where the ATMs are located, but we can definitely see that shift.
Interesting. Thanks so much for that, Sven. So want to remind everybody here in the session, this is your session. So If you'd like to introduce a question to our panel, please feel free to ask that question right in the question field, and I'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll do our best to get all of your questions answered by our panelists. So we talked a little bit in the earlier session about ITMs. So I think that this pandemic has reinvigorated the conversation around the interactive teller machine. Certainly we see from the research that there would be a propensity amongst customers to want to use an ITM, even though that it's not widely adopted yet or well socialized in terms of what it is. Now, in transparency, the three institutions that we have on our panel today are three institutions that have not yet adopted interactive teller machines. But I think that's a great opportunity to ask, maybe not so much why, but how are you thinking about ITMs? And has the pandemic brought the ITM discussion back to the forefront? And so, Corey, let's start with you. No ITMs at Origin today. Are they potentially in the future?
They absolutely can be potentially in the future. And for us, it's going to be looking at the strategy to make sure that we are where the customer needs us. And so you talk about human interaction, through ITMs, you can actually have that human interaction all the way through a virtual interface. Is that acceptable for all customers? Maybe not, but it could be acceptable for enough customers in certain areas that where it would make sense for us. And where we're starting to look at that is, could we maybe put an ITM instead of building a new branch near a college, or can we put it maybe in a coffee shop or an airport or something of that nature, where we can actually have that human-to-human interaction through a video connection, be able to help and service those customers in a way that we would do otherwise if they walked into a branch. And if that's something that it sees, as an opportunity that our customers would like to see in certain areas, in certain markets, we absolutely want to be open to the conversation. But for us, it's just something that we've evaluated throughout. But again, this is a completely different world, right? We would never had the opportunity to really understand what it would look like with no branches. And so looking at ITM and that strategy moving forward is going to be fun. But I'm super interested to hear what Stacy and Leslie have to say with their institutions and their demographics, because they're in a lot more metropolitan areas than some of us.
Well, and I know, so Stacy, we'll start with you as perfect transition. TD prides itself on being unexpectedly human. Does an interactive teller machine help that or hurt that?
Yeah, well, it can't help but help it. And so when we think about those interactions, the thing that's really important is, it's easy for us to have a panel here and to opine and share some thoughts, but really it's all about that customer lens and what is it that our customers want. And our customers, hands down, will always crave some kind of a human connection. And so when you think about what we have available for technology, some will be completely hands-off, like an online banking or even mobile banking. But when you get to that ITM, you do, as Corey mentioned, you have that ability to still have a very, very strong, personalized, that's super important, right? Personalized interaction that could happen. And so while we're not at the forefront yet to be able to bring that kind of infrastructure to our network, at the same time, it's something strategically that I think all of us should be looking at, because that does carry the opportunity to still have a deep, personalized human connection.
Thank you. Leslie, your thoughts on the same question?
Not too different from Corey and Stacy. I am actually not aware of any changes at CIBC, but like when you think about it, customer behavior can shift, and it doesn't happen overnight. But I think the pandemic has really made people more open to different ways of collaboration and connecting with people. And just the way I see it is in the same fashion that companies like PayPal and Amazon led that behavior to have people more comfortable do digital payments. Now using Zoom, because people are working remotely, I think are enabling that adoption faster than otherwise, it wouldn't happen if there wouldn't be a pandemic forcing us to do this. So I think situations like this might encourage people and banks to maybe consider options like ITMs.
Yeah, it's a great point. And actually somebody here in the chat just mentioned that ITMs are able to reach markets where maybe the branch isn't the right fit, like Corey said, and also create some potential brand recognition for the bank as well. Sven, somebody just asked an interesting question that I want to direct over to you. They asked, why would a customer go to an interactive teller machine when they can, and this individual argues maybe even should, get the same functionality from the comfort of their home through an online or mobile channel?
Sure. So that's a hard question to answer, right? Generally speaking, if a customer can do something on mobile, they're going to versus going to an ITM. Really, where an ITM comes to play is doing these physical transactions that sometimes customer can't do it over the phone, like cashing a check, or do other transactions that are not available to an ATM. But going back to the question here previously, so what we find, and we recently, Cartronics released a health of cash study for 2020. And so the top 2 reasons that we find for customers wanting to go and transact into the branch with a teller is because they want to withdraw cash at denominations are not available at the ATM, and they want to generate cash checks or deposit a check or cash. So these are 2 big reasons that make up over 50% of the respondents when they answer it this way. So the financial institutions that we work with, and we're trying to look at the distribution strategy they have and what they're trying to accomplish, we tend to find that why ITMs are a great piece of technology. I don't know that anybody will argue against that, is that there's other ways for us to be able to solve for some of these challenges without investing a very expensive piece of technology and build the infrastructure in the back end to support it. So similar to what Corey was saying from brand and entering new markets, what we tend to find is that when we're working with different financial institutions, there's other solutions available, like, for example, outsourcing, which is something that I work with. But then there's other solutions that we can tend to go and help with achieving these goals and solving for some of these challenges. Things like a surcharge-free, for example. That's one that you can easily allow your customers to be able to use different locations out there without having the surcharges and penalties, which tend to not be an enjoyable feature for customers, right? And then there's other solutions like branding. So all of these things coupled together can certainly help solve for some of these challenges that we're trying to really solve for today. And ITM can certainly be a big piece of that. But different financial institutions are really going about different directions in how to solve for this.
Thank you, Sven. I appreciate the answer. Corey, another question just came in and I'd like to direct your way first. It's an interesting, scale thing, given, the smallest institution kind of here on the panel. Then I'd love to hear from Leslie and Stacy on the same question. So with the shift from, physical to digital transactions, you're a digital lover, man. So do you see any sort of decisions to now really slow down brick and mortar growth, either in terms of de novo, new branches, renovations? Is it time to kind of pump the brakes on some of those things?
I think the short answer, yes, but let me explain that a little bit. I don't think that it's to move completely away from a branch strategy, right? We absolutely want to have that human element. We want to have those physical locations where they need to be. However, as the transition of customers from a more physical preferred channel to a more digital preferred channel continues, and COVID, we were seeing this already, but COVID has kind of accelerated, right? This whole entire process. So I do think what you're going to begin to see is financial institutions really need to take a hard look at the density in which they're talking about developing or growing branch strategy out. We don't need to put a branch necessarily in every little corner of the town that we want to be able to reach to if you have a good, sufficient digital product. You can have those services that the customer can't get met through the digital channel, or for the customers who want to come in, they can come into the physical location at maybe a greater distance, because the primary transactions that they're doing, they're day-to-day transactions, your transfers of money, your handling of determining where their finances are on a day-to-day basis, reviewing accounts, their transactions, trying to create a budget. Those things are accessible and easy to do through a digital channel. So whenever they have those more substantial needs to come into a location, it may not be necessary that it's right across the street, right? And so I do think that financial institutions need to look at what the customer needs are in the markets that they're specifically looking at to determine whether or not those branch strategies need to be broader or small than what they were before.
So Stacy, you might just be able to literally piggyback both on Corey as well as what one of our meeting attendees just said. He said it's all about points of presence and letting customers choose which channel fits the transaction and their timing and what they need to do. So as a brand that was built on the shoulders of convenience, I imagine you'd agree with those statements.
Yeah, for sure, right. And I think what we find is when it comes to legendary customer experiences, it's not a one size fits all. It is really all about having multiple options that will fit best for our customers. But you got it. Let me just go into that employee experience part of it, right? We have to make sure that our employees are engaged, that our employees are able to use those digital solutions, speak about them so fluently that they're able to ensure that customers realize that it's not like, hey, go over here and do this in another channel because we can't be bothered with you. Instead, it's about, did you know, EJ, in order to make it easier for you, you could have done this via mobile and in the safety of your own home or with your toes in the sand, whatever it may be, right? And so I think that's the very fine balance that we need to strike between the digital piece as well as that human interaction. And so not a one size fits all, and this is where I'm going to come back around to that customer listening. And so we're going to find that some customers are going to have very, very different needs than others. And from that, that's how we redefine what these customer interactions need to look like. Our branches, we call them stores here at TD, but they are the very center of our strategy. That's not going to change, but what will change is, why does a customer need to come? And so I start to think of those basic transactions, which all of us have said have started to migrate to other spaces. Now let's bring them in for advice conversations, for how to really help from a financial livelihood perspective. And I think when you get into those deeper types of conversations with customers, that's really where the future of the interactions are in your brick and mortar.
I cannot agree anymore. I think from our perspective, and just let me step back because similar to the ITM, I'm actually not aware of any changes in the context of your question. However, I do agree that the voice of the customer remains key because we need to understand now with this new normal in banking, where are the channels that are more, on demand for customers to complete some of their services. So, and this is, I think, where it becomes key for those banks to be able to, strategically invest in those areas. So where they know that customers for this service is better for digital, is better in digital, or is better at the branch. And that's where the strategy should come from, like voice of the customer and the demand of those services. I personally don't think the face-to-face interactions are going to go away. And just to very aligned to Stacey's feedback, there are particular type of transactions that require that longer, sitting down and understanding financial advice. I don't think digital can replace that altogether. So I think there is going to be a combination of channels.
Yeah, and EJ, if I could, I just want to kind of double in on that as well. Is, as Stacey said, like, listen to the customer, right? And so as the customers start to come in and they start to do transactions in a branch, or they sit there on the digital channel, we have to be having those conversations, whether that's through their data or through physical conversation or on the digital channel specifically, to determine what those needs are going to be. And that way, whenever they come into the branch, right, we talk about the daily transactions that are going primarily to digital right now. They were already doing that before. We're going to see a lot more of that move over completely for some customers. When they come into that branch, they can actually have a more hyper-personalized experience because of it, right? So when they come in and they're having that conversation with us, it can be so much more relevant than, hey, I'm just here to drop off a check, or hey, I'm just here to check my balance. So I think it's going to be interesting for us in how we do communicate and listen to our customers.
Let's keep it with you here for a second, Corey. A question just came in that might relate a little bit to that consultative experience. So Albert asks, as customers look at more options for wealth management, do you see a bank's representatives transcend to actually be financial advisors? And given that, how do you see branch transformation adjusting to this trend? And that's a huge opportunity, he argues, for banks.
Absolutely. And I think that today we should be viewing ourselves as bankers, as trusted advisors, regardless, right? It should have been something that we saw ourselves in that light before. But I think even more so now, as customers are trying to navigate these very unique journeys, right, in each individual's lives, as a financial institution, we have to make sure that not just through investment services, but all of the services and products that we deliver out there are set up to make sure that the customer is ultimately successful. And through the use of that advisory component through our branch staff or our various technologies, that we create a layer of trust and confidence in our brand to be able to support them to be financially successful.
Awesome. Sven, we're talking a lot about distribution strategy and the debate around, do we put in more ATMs? Do we introduce ITMs? Do we close branches? Do we renovate branches, make them smaller? What advice would you give to a financial institution that's, contemplating their look of the future and their future distribution channels? What are some of the things they should really be processing?
Sure. So I go back to what Stacy said a little bit earlier, which was that there is no strategy fits all, right? So what may work for Stacy and her financial institution may not work for Corey or somebody else, right? So the couple of things when we talk to our partners is let's really try to understand what exactly we're trying to solve for. Again, that's big, right? The customers are speaking or they've spoken, right? So let's try to understand that first. So once we understand what we're really trying to accomplish, then there's lots of different ways that we can solve for different challenges, right? But the first key thing to do is understanding what we're trying to accomplish. Now, on top of that, as many of our consumers are being impacted, so are the financial institutions during the pandemic, right? So what we're trying to solve for, everyone is facing capital constraints, for example, today from an FI perspective. So we need to find solutions that really help the customers, are deployed easily, and are cost effective. So essentially everybody wins, right? So that's what we're working with different financial institutions, and those are the things that we're trying to consider. But as we talk to them, is one of the things, what are you trying to solve for? What type of transactions are you trying to migrate? Where do you want to take your transactions? So what is important, for example? So is it important that your customers speak to your tellers face-to-face? Or is it important for you to drive those transactions to a digital channel, whether it's mobile or ATMs or ITMs if they have them? So that, once you understand that and where you're trying to go, then the solutions sort of present themselves, right? Whether you want to enter a new market, whether you do that by buying new ITMs and standing up that infrastructure, or doing a branding, for example, a branding scheme, which tends to work, or for a lot of financial institutions that we're working with today, what we're finding is that because of the capital constraints, they really need to update their existing fleet that they have from an ATM perspective, but don't have the capital to upgrade it, and they're stuck. They're part of this mouse wheel of different upgrades that are required, but don't necessarily have the capital to do it, and that they still need to focus on the customer experience overall. So how do you solve for that? So different solutions out there, whether it's branding, surcharge-free, ATM outsourcing, different things that can be employed. But again, I go back to what Stacey said, there is not one solution fits all.
Spot on. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's do, we've got a question from our audience that I want to ask a little bit uniquely. So this might require the panelists to actually raise their hand to say yes. So the question is, are any of you currently using video technology for branch lending or virtual branch? Any video technology out there yet? Stacy's kind of,
That's my sort of.
What's happening at TV that's sort of using video stuff?
Yeah, and so we do actually have just some videos in some of our drive-thrus. We've got over 1,200 stores that go from Maine to Florida, and in some instances we may have 7 lanes of drive-thrus, and so we've got a little bit of a video. It's not a real ITM, it's more just a quick video. So there's that piece. But when we start to get into these advice portions, we actually have started contacting our customers and using WebEx sessions. That happens to be the secure platform that we're using, but we're setting up those conversations so that they can be face-to-face with a financial advisor to help our customers through. So we've really just started the very tip of the iceberg there. That's why I said sort of, and not like whole hog into it. But certainly it's an area where we're able to keep that human connection alive during this COVID time.
Thank you so much. And we talk a lot about how important the idea of problem prevention is, and absent great problem prevention, you probably ought to have really great problem resolution. So Mark asks an interesting question. Leslie, I want to start this one with you. What is your understanding of, so if and when one channel impacts another within the organization. So the specific example is, let's say a customer, for whatever reason, fails at doing some sort of a transaction at an ATM. Let's just say it was a balance transfer. But the branch is closed, so they can't just walk in the door, and then they try to do it digitally. How do you find that banks should accommodate these issues with customers who are trying to do the same transaction and it takes them multiple channels to accomplish it?
Well, I think it goes back to the need of that omnichannel experience, right? Regardless of COVID or not, I think the strength of that omnichannel experience needs to continue, and especially now there is a lot of shifting behaviors. So we need to learn what those shifts are so we can prepare all channels to be able to jump in and try to solve a problem as soon as possible and guide the customers to a solution really fast. I think, in the other hand, we also have we have to work on alternatives to prevent those situations. So things like digitally, I can speak on the field of my space, but digitally, I know there is a lot of ways that we can prevent or at least guide customers. So having ways to customers communicate online that is stuck in the process, have a chatbot that can help the customers understand what is the issue, what is the best possible path for resolution, and if the issue cannot be resolved within the digital channel, for the sake of example, then what would be the next best channel to move on to have that issue resolved. So I think there are so many different ways that we can, before the issue happens, prevent, but we have to be prepared to provide that very robust support to really minimize the situation and help customers.
And speaking of the omni-channel experience and where channels tend to converge with one another potentially, we alluded a little bit earlier to the idea of the new account opening experience. Corey, the new account opening experience to me is you walk into a branch and you sit down with a CSR and you say, here's what I want, and they, worst case scenario, they slide that brochure in front of you and you got the Chinese food menu trying to make sense of which one you want. That's the worst case scenario. How does the whole new account opening experience change in an omni-channel world?
I think the way that it changes is the same thing that we were talking with the question here before Leslie was highlighting on is, first of all, I think it starts with one of the most important parts of anything that a bank can be doing to try to do any sort of digital transformation, and it's to break down the silos in between your digital and your physical experiences, right? You have to start there. You have to make sure that these aren't two separate systems, right? It needs, first of all, it needs to be one central system, so that if a customer starts or stops a process in that one, let's say on mobile, they get confused or they're a little unaware of exactly where they fit as far as what type of account they want to open, or maybe they have questions about that mortgage or that loan. They can come and start that process back up in the physical branch and not have to restart all over. And so I think that when you start to look at the digital account opening process as financial institutions, we have to start simplifying it for the customers, right? On the front end, we have to make it fast. We have to make it intuitive. We have to be able to guide those customers through that process to make sure that they're getting in the right products and services at that time that they're starting the process. And that there's anything else like, other products, other services that could benefit the customer, that they're aware of those things. And it's very clear to them, and it's simple for them to add those components in. I think as a whole, banks really need to sit down and look at the compliance side of this, the audit and risk acceptance of this. I think there's a huge conversation needs to be had in a number of financial institutions on what is the risk value of blocking certain account openings, from coming in for funding, right? When does fraud actually occur? And so those are all things that we have to start to have a conversation around to make sure that the process makes sense, first of all, before we even start talking about a software or a product to fit that piece. But ultimately, I do believe that most financial institutions need to reinvent their digital onboarding process. We're having really good conversations with a number of companies and partners and internally to figure out how we can optimize it, because it's something that, coming out of the post-COVID pandemic, if we can get out of it this year, right? Who knows what the new normal is going to be? Will it be much more similar to what we're dealing with today? We want to make sure that the process of getting customers into our financial institutions so we can help them is easy. And so I think it starts with that.
Hey,
Yeah, and
Spen,
if I'm
can I ask you like a really hard question?
Go with it.
All right, this is a doozy. And then Stacy, I'm coming to you after this. I know you had something to say, and I've got a question for you. So hold that thought for just 1 second. So Spen, this is a tough one, but I think you're my guy to answer it here. So one of our participants, one of our attendees, would like to ask. This is an awesomely passionate question. There are close to 1 billion people who are not part of the financial inclusion model, who don't even have a bank account. So with the pandemic, is there a chance that this gap could even widen further? How do you think the gap could be reduced? And will this be possible through things like ITMs, mobile channels, or any other means? So is there technology that can help us bank more people in this world?
That is a hard question, first of all. So with that said, what we don't know as of right now is the effect of the pandemic overall. We have an idea. We think it's shifting consumer behaviors, but we don't know exactly where it's going to end up. But what I do believe, based on the question, as far as the billion people that are unbanked at this moment in time and they don't have access to different things, I think the pandemic overall might actually help some of that challenge. So everything that we're talking about today is really the effects of COVID, and then how do we go into an omni-channel presence and really develop our digital strategies and digital channels, digital products that we have. One of the challenges that we find, especially with the unbanked market, is that the infrastructure generally is not there. And so the unbanked, one, don't have access to the financial institutions, to the banks, and don't have access to their products. What I believe, and I say I believe because frankly I don't know it for sure, I don't think any of us do, is that with the different behavior changes that we're seeing now due to COVID and pandemic, many of the financial institutions are rethinking their strategies, and that includes a revamp of their digital brands and digital products. And I believe that will cause an upstick of the unbanked to be able to use some of these products that different financial institutions are creating, just because of the manner that we are now delivering these new products to the customer. So I believe, I don't know the answer for sure, but I believe based on what we're doing, some of the trends that we're seeing in the financial institution space, I think this might actually help the situation in some cases.
That was a great answer. Thank you so much for handling that tough one. Stacy, let's go back to you. I have a question for you, but I know you were about to share something, I think, on new account opening.
Yeah, I'm just thrilled Spend answered that one. That's all. No, but honestly, here's what I would say. I just wanted to add one piece to what Corey was saying about the silos within the organization, because I think Mark's comment is actually more about culture within your organization than it is about necessarily problem prevention or even that omni-channel experience. And when you think about it, if someone does have a difficulty at an ATM, it's not, oh, that's TD Bank's ATM department. If they have trouble getting into one of our digital offerings, oh, that's our digital team. Like they think of it, they think of your organization as one TD, one organization. And so the tearing down of those silos is such a critical cultural piece of who you need to be if customer centricity is your goal.
I love it. And
absolutely.
All right, so go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Stacy, you nailed it right there. You know, because so often banks are looking at their digital and their human experiences as separate components, right? And they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be centralized and aligned together to make sure that we're serving the needs of the customers in the best way possible.
EJ, if I may ask a question to the panel, just briefly to Corey and Stacey, as we're thinking about this and digitalization and the omni-channel experience. So as of right now, we're talking about new customer openings, a new product being sold as the customer walks into the branch. But now as we're digitalizing everything, do you find that it's easier or better by coming up with next best product that the customers need because of the information that now we're having, the different products that we are offering to them?
You want to start, Stacey, and I'll go? Okay, perfect. You know, I think it is getting easier, but it's only going to get easier again if we have those silos broken down in our data to make sure that we understand the entire picture of the customer's interaction with our brand. So if the separation between our physical and our digital channels still exist, and then we struggle to get accurate numbers across the entire customer base, I think it's somewhat inaccurate, right? And not to say it's not more successful, but it's not entirely where it should be. And so, for us as an organization, and I know a lot of other financial institutions that I talk to, through client advisory boards and other conversations just in, collaboration, it's about trying to figure out how do we get to that central single pane of glass view of who our customer is and what their needs are and how do we serve them, right? We don't have every single product for every single customer. There are certain services that my financial institution might not choose to be really, forward thinking on, where Stacy and them may be able to offer a better product, and vice versa. But we need to understand that what our customer needs are and the products that we think we can excel with, that they understand what they are and they understand how they can use them, and we make sure that we get those in front of them at a time that they need it the most.
Yeah, and this is where I think, Leslie, you mentioned the onboarding piece, right? So it's one thing to actually go through the physical checklist of opening an account. It's a whole nother piece to ensure that our customers are completely onboarded. And you know me, I'm a fan of the human interaction when it comes to that, in addition to using digital correspondence, contacting the customer how they prefer to be contacted, in order to tell them about all the benefits and features, and then also to consider other products or services that maybe they hadn't even thought of.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think part of that understanding comes from knowing what is that client journey across all different channels, in the front end and in the back end, and then you connect the dots and you're able to address, fill in the gaps and address what could potentially be an issue and prevent that. But again, breaking those silos, I agree, is absolutely important. And going back to your point, customers don't see as in digital, they see CIBC. So yes, I think that's absolutely a key takeaway.
Well, we're coming up almost on our time here. There's certainly one question that we want to make sure we want to get in and ask, and then I'm going to ask our panelists if there was one last thing that they wanted to share with all of the attendees here today, what would that be? But so Stacy, we love your role and we'd recommend it to any bank in the world. Great to have somebody that has watch over the customer experience and the employee experience and speaks to culture. So, not that, you're a rock star like Corey and Leslie and Sven, and your role is a rock star role. But if I were sitting like in Corey's chair or Leslie's chair, one of the things that might keep me up at night a little bit is I'm going to dream up all this cool digital stuff, right? And I want to roll out all these cool tools, but somewhere in a branch, or in your case, a store, is probably an employee asking themselves, is that going to replace me someday? And so my question for you is, when you put your employee experience hat on, how do you balance and how do you keep people engaged in the face of omnichannel growth?
Yeah, and that's not easy, right? That requires nurturing every single interaction with our employees along the way. And so, listen, I mean, there isn't any, again, one size fits all with this. But here's what I would say is that it's that redefining. It's ensuring that our employees have a voice. They're the closest to our customers. They're the front line. So they have great ideas and suggestions for how we can continue to redefine what this space needs to look like. But then I think it's the reinforcement, right? And here at TD, our culture is very much that our people bring it to life. And so we can have the best products and services, but unless our people are bringing that to life for our customers, then we may not be as successful. And so I think it's keeping your employees engaged along the way. Change management is so critical, so that folks know, hey, here's the new technology, but here's how you now can use that with your customers. And then it goes back to the repurposing of the role, right? Maybe we don't have tellers in the future. Maybe we do have more trusted financial advisors. So I think everyone's pretty open knowing that this is going to continue to evolve over time. And so I would just say be open, listen, and then when you listen, find out what you really are hearing, and keep your employees engaged along the way.
Thanks, Stacy. All right, here's the order of our speed round to close it out. It's going to go Corey, Sven, Leslie, Stacy, only because that's the order of my Hollywood squares here. What would be the final piece of advice that you'd give to anybody who is pondering an ATM strategy, an ITM strategy, a digital strategy as we move forward through this pandemic?
Yeah, I think you've heard it echoed probably from all of us, throughout this, and you're probably hearing it on the vast majority of the webinars and conferences and calls that you're probably having or reading articles online, and the value of breaking down those silos and making sure you're creating this omni experience, right, all the way through, from your physical interactions to your digital actions. But the problem is the vast majority of financial institutions are going to struggle to do this quickly and at scale in the way that they're going to need to be able to respond to the unique needs of the customers today. And the reason why is the vast majority of us are sitting on legacy infrastructure and systems and partnerships that really make it difficult for us to be able to make those changes. And I think for financial institutions, in order to serve our customers in the best way possible, we have to start to decouple some of these things away and make sure that we're building these products, these services, this capability, your mobile app, your digital onboarding processes, your ITMs, your ATMs, on a foundation where it's agile and quick and easy for you to make those changes. Because when your customers need it, they need it now. They don't need it a year from now. They don't need it a year and a half from now. We need to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success, right? We couldn't predict COVID, but we knew the trends and the patterns that were happening. If we don't make those changes now, then we can really only blame ourselves.
So let me take from there, Corey. I think I was next. So I fully agree with what Corey just stated, 100%. COVID obviously has had a large impact on different financial institutions and really how we interact with our customers. I said earlier this week that COVID has done to branch transformation what we've all been trying to do for the past 5 years, I think. And really, it is important to think about this as we talk about, different strategies moving forward and how we're going to meet our customer demands, right? So it's something that's happening. We know that for a fact. We know the customer behavior is changing and is going to change. We don't know exactly the far-reaching impact of COVID, but what we do know is the customer behavior has changed. So we don't know where it's going to settle, but I think it's important for all of us as an industry that we think about how do we meet the new challenges and how do we solve for the different demands of a new customer after the pandemic, and really the time to do that is now.
I agree with you guys, and I think from my perspective, the one thing that I would like to add, it is that right now, going back, the voice of the customer is there. It's clear and loud. We, banks who have the opportunity to collect that data and banks who don't have, maybe that's the first step, because moving forward, the decisions that bank made will have to be really focused on data-driven, decisions. And that way, banks will be able to set up the strategy that they want to move forward in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term. The uncertainty is here, but I think if you are aware of what's happening, the consumer behaviors, how they are shifting, it's just a good start.
Yeah, and you know me, I like to strip things down. So I've got a couple of 3 little words. Know your customers. Very, very important. Make interactions easy. They've got to be easy without any customer effort. And then I think the last advice is keep moving forward. And this is a new normal. We've never been in it. None of us have. And so we've got to figure out what that looks like.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to all of you, Corey, Sven, Leslie, and Stacy. You all shared along the same lines of listen to your customers. I'd be remiss if I didn't say we'd love to help any bank looking to do that, and you can visit eighthpower.com for more information. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor, Ventus, and thanks so much to Bill Stutzman for bringing such a great organization to the table and helping us to facilitate this dialogue. And of course, to our friends from ATM Marketplace for always serving as such a fantastic resource for everything ATM, everything financial services, and definitely a definitive go-to and indispensable resource in our industry. So one last very special thanks to all of our panelists who have devoted so much of their time, not only to spend with you today, but also to prepare for today's session. So we'd like to thank you so much again on behalf of Ventus, ATM Marketplace, and Eighth Power. My name is EJ Kritz. Everybody stay safe, and we look forward to keeping in touch. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.